example, U.S. online sports betting will reach $300 billion by 2030. So that's just in 10 years seeing a massive jump.
Hi, I'm Everett White, and this is Deep Coverage presented by Quick Take and The Athletic.
Online sports betting is big business and on a meteoric rise.
DraftKings went public in April through a reverse merger that allowed them to be publicly traded. And it's been nothing but gains for investors. It's really been kind of shooting straight up.
I think we've seen a lot of people kind of be okay with gambling because there's so much money coming in from tax. I mean, you saw it in Colorado when they legalized marijuana. I think like 8 months in, they're like, we got enough tax money for the year. Like, we can stop now. So gambling, you're going to see the same thing. There's just the way these laws were passed in each individual state, it really tends to make a lot of money for the state.
The COVID-19 pandemic is also linked to the increase in popularity of legalized sports betting online.
People are bored. People are looking for entertainment.
It makes sports a little more enjoyable, and especially now when we've just kind of been sitting around and waiting for something fun, you could do it $1 at a time, enjoy it, and I think that's how it's going to work. People are going to see it. It's going to get bigger and bigger, and just make more money for a lot of states.
22 states have legalized betting, 18 allow in-person wagers, and 11 allow for online bets. So it may be a while before the entire U.S. gets on board.
Joining me to talk about fantasy sports and online sports gambling in the U.S. is managing editor of fantasy for The Athletic, Nando DeFino. So give us a general primer on the field. What's the difference between daily fantasy sports and traditional sports betting? You know, how do daily fantasy and traditional fantasy differ? And then also, how do each of those different markets compare?
Well, it's kind of interesting. The studies that we used to do with they still do with the FSGA. There's a great overlap between the two groups. If you like to sports gamble, you generally also like to play DFS. The traditional fantasy gamers a little different. It's more of a long-term thing you do with friends. But the DFS and the fantasy gaming groups overlap really nicely. It's a burgeoning group. They have a lot of disposable income. They've gone to a lot of schooling. It's just a very kind of target-rich environment, as they would have said in Top Gun. But it's generally, people who are really into sports. They're super fans. There's a little cross-section of people who just, very analytical, aren't exactly fans, but they found a way to kind of beat the system. But it's generally a good group of people who if you want to advertise to them or if you want to reach them for your products, they're young, they have a lot of money, and they're really into sports.
That's a great point, that they are very target rich. Companies like DraftKings and FanDuel are doing a lot of advertising around sporting events such as, the NFL, NBA playoffs in the bubble, MLB, soccer, all those different kinds of sports. How have these companies sort of legitimized the sports gambling industry, in your opinion, Nando?
It's actually been great. There are so many, like each state has their own set of laws, but they're all kind of these similar, I guess, characteristics to them that every company has to hit. And so if, you've got to spend a lot of money, you got to get all these licenses, you've got to jump through so many hoops, and it's a fairly difficult process. Where before, if you want to gamble on sports 3 years ago, you would go to Las Vegas, that'd be your only option unless you wanted to go online and try one of these offshore sites, which, like I've done them before. And it's just kind of like, you got to send them a copy of your license. You got to go through these 14 different things, and they kind of do whatever they can to not give you your money. But sports like DraftKings, FanDuel, William Hill, all these companies that are legitimized in the United States are really like you really, really have to watch what you do, and you have to be super careful or take it away from you. So it gives you a better feeling of confidence and a little more comfort if you want to use these sites, because they've gone through just so much and like just all these different steps that they had to complete in order to be legitimately recognized in the United States. Absolutely.
And you mentioned Las Vegas as kind of one of the first places to have this kind of sports gambling. And, it's going to be sort of spreading out across the U.S. So far, New Jersey and a bunch of other states have legalized it. What effect do you see this having on the leagues and the teams, and then on the players?
Well, it's in a way it's good for everybody. I mean, before you would see sports gambling kind of in the shadows, and it was a bit of a taboo subject. Mm-hmm. But now that it's kind of like out there, it's like I'm on my phone at my in-laws' house talking about betting on the Giants game right now, and it's okay. Like, it's totally cool. I'm not like that degenerate anymore. And it's I don't know. It's a good thing for the leagues, because if there's more revenue, they may take a little piece of it, but there's a little more exposure for them. There's going to be more interest. It started with fantasy sports. Like, why would a guy in New York want to watch a Cincinnati Bengals game if they're not playing the Giants or the Jets or the Bills? And it's because you had a couple guys on that team. Now, for the same thing, man, you got an interest in the Cincinnati Bengals game if you're living in New York, where you might not have otherwise, because you like the line and you've got a little money on the game. So it really sparks a lot more interest in everything.
You mentioned sort of the new culture around fantasy sports and around sports gambling. What do you think how do you think this has affected the way that we think about sports as a business? Is there any sort of new tilt that fantasy sports and sports gambling have made in sports business?
So I'm not sure it's happened yet. But I think as you see more states ratify it and it becomes legal in more states, there's just the states that have done it so far, especially New Jersey, have seen such a huge windfall of money coming in, and that's tax money. And, you hear people complain about how, our municipality had to pay for the stadium. Well, now, maybe it'll be the DraftKings stadium. They have enough money to basically just take away that whole taxpayer funded stadium stuff that everyone gets so angry about. I think you'll be seeing a lot of that in the years to come. I think you'll be seeing a lot of people kind of be okay with gambling because there's so much money coming in from tax. You saw it in Colorado when they legalized marijuana. I think like 8 months in, they're like, we got enough tax money for the year. Like, we can stop now. So gambling, you're going to see the same thing. There's just the way these laws were passed in each individual state, it really tends to make a lot of money for the state. And that's going to make people, I guess, in a way happy. If you really follow that kind of stuff, you might not see it in your everyday life, but you're going to get extra money coming into the coffers. And that's because of sports gambling. And that's usually a good thing that'll make everybody happy. So I think you're going to see it reviewed a little more positively in terms of sports business, because it's basically just making money for everybody.
Gotcha. And that's a great point, that it's sort of coming to a tipping point in the U.S. While it's been legal and accessible in Europe for so long, why do you think the U.S. is just coming around to sports gambling in such a piecemeal fashion?
I'm not sure. There's a faction of people who are, anti-gambling. You're always going to hear that story about, that 47-year-old father who gambled away his kid's college fund and stuff like that. And those are very effective stories. We haven't actually seen very many of them yet. But I also think maybe, it was always just Vegas. Like Vegas was where you would go. Vegas, you'd go, you'd get entertained, you'd be able to sports gamble, you casino gamble, stuff like that. But I think as more Native American casinos are opening up and they're becoming a lot of sports, especially New York State, they're getting a sportsbook edge to it. People, I think it just took a while to get it a little bit conditioned to like, oh yeah, this, having the Turning Stone Casino here, right outside of Utica, it's not something that's ruined our city. This has actually been pretty good for it. There are new jobs. We can go there for the weekend and hang out in the hotel. They're doing it very, these are good things. There's a downside to everything, but I think the experience people have had with a lot of these Native American casinos opening up is this is actually good for our community. And we're not really seeing the seedy downside just yet. So I think they're more open to expanding that, especially if they're hearing that it's going to be making more money tax-wise for everybody.
Agreed wholeheartedly. And being in New York, I'm from Mount Vernon, New York, and up in Yonkers, you know the racetrack up there.
George Washington.
Exactly. The new casino is supposedly doing great numbers. You mentioned Jersey. I want to talk about Jersey just a little bit again. What's bridge culture like? Having to go from New York over the George Washington Bridge to go place bets. What can you talk about with regard to that?
Well, I don't think people. I think it's kind of fun. It's like a little adventure. Like before, you had to jump on a plane. You could have gone to Atlantic City, but you couldn't sports bet in Atlantic City. So you go across the bridge. You could take the ferry right to Jersey, hop on your phone, biddly boop, and then just get right back on and go back. I think it's kind of it's like a fun adventure. It's like going to a pumpkin patch, Like if you're in New York, there's no pumpkin patch by you. You got to pick it up out of the box on the sidewalk. This is like, I'm going somewhere that's kind of fun, that's close enough, and I'm going to have a little fun for a little while. If you believe the numbers, like usually it's 19% of people aged 18 plus in the United States are gamblers or sports bettors, and also daily fantasy players. So, you say in the biggest number, 700,000 people want to do it. Say you get like even 20,000 people coming from New York into Jersey just to place a sports bet once in a while.
Speaking a little bit more about casinos, the recent ESPN, DraftKings, and Caesars deal, how significant was that to like the entire sports gambling and fantasy sports market?
It's pretty huge, actually. ESPN's like, the name when it comes to that, and they can hit you so many ways, like TV, on your phone, over the internet, streaming on ESPN Plus. So for DraftKings we talked about. I'll give you a good example. Like 5 years ago, when we're writing stories. And, for daily fantasy stuff, you want to talk about how good a pitcher is going to do. You talk about the Vegas line. It was always the Vegas line is this and the Vegas line is that, because that was the parlance. Now you're talking about, well, DraftKings has them at this, or DraftKings has them at that odds. And, in your head, when everyone's saying the Vegas line, you're like, Vegas is the blah, blah, blah. Now everyone on ESPN writing about it is going to say DraftKings has them at 250, DraftKings has them here, DraftKings has them there. And it just becomes the natural way to spill out what the odds are. So I think it's literally going to change the conversation and the way you talk about odds. And with so many people who watch ESPN, listen to them on the radio, have their podcasts, whatever, they're going to hear DraftKings has them at this, DraftKings has them at that. Where it used to be, Vegas says this, or FanDuel says this. You're just going to hear DraftKings so much that it's just going to be that automatic place you want to go to.
Question, and this is completely scoopy. What's the next big deal to drop if there is one?
You know what? So there's a company called Monkey Knife Fight that's been quietly, they're
Great name.
the DFS game than the gambling, but they're quietly like getting partnerships with a lot of baseball teams. And I mean, it hasn't been quiet if you've been following it, but the person watching this may never have heard of Monkey Knife Fight, but they're making some very smart moves. On a bigger picture, I think Barstool is just going to blow it up. And I mean, like, so many people follow Barstool, and so many people are so loyal to Barstool that, they're going to have Barstool casinos. I think they can brand so many things Barstool. So I'd say Monkey Knife Fight is going to be surprisingly big soon, and catch you off guard maybe. But Barstool, when they're ready to make their moves, man, they're going to be everywhere. And I think they're going to be the challenger to DraftKings.
And just piggybacking off what you said about kind of, sports gambling culture, they have their own culture that they can sort of imprint into whatever they do, which is perfect for them and sort of puts them in a lead position to make big moves, like you said.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Nando, what else should we know about the sports betting and fantasy sports industry going forward? We're in the middle of the NFL season now. NBA playoffs are sort of rounding out. MLB playoffs are starting to round into form. What should we look for going forward?
Fantasy football is always going to be strong. That's like the biggest of them all. I think fantasy baseball this year, because it was a 60-game season, this is a very interesting thing. A lot of people said they enjoyed the shortened season. Usually a lot of people don't play fantasy baseball because it's a huge slog. 162 games, you got to know every single player. But this year, with just like a tiny window, I think maybe we'll be seeing more games, just giving people the option to play just 60 days instead of the entire season, which could boost that in popularity. Sports gambling, I mean, I think there are about 20 states right now that have laws that allow it. Not all of them are taking bets yet. There's still some things they have to do, but that's just going to grow and grow. I mean, like, maybe you'll get 6 or 7 states. If you just follow the example of what happened with DFS and the states that legalized that, there were like 6, 7 states that were always sticklers. Louisiana was one, and they actually just came back and brought DFS in and legalized it, which was huge for the industry. But I think you're going to see gambling go the same way, just slowly as everyone sees how much money every state's making. And especially now with so much money missing from budgets for all kinds of things because of COVID, you're going to see gambling expand. And I think mobile on the FSGA's big push is it should be on the phone. It's got to be on the phone. That's going to give you more tax money, more widespread people enjoying sports betting. And I don't want to sound like like a lobbyist for sports gambling here, but it's just you could set your own rules. You can have fun with it. It really sparks interest more in sports in general because, again, you're watching a Cincinnati Bengals game for no reason other than you have $3 on the Bengals to win, or $3 on Joe Burrow to throw more than 280.5 yards. It makes sports a little more enjoyable, and especially now when we've just kind of been sitting around and waiting for something fun. You could do it $1 at a time, enjoy it, and I think that's how it's going to work. People are going to see it. It's going to get bigger and bigger, and just make more money for a lot of states.
That's awesome, and that's a great place to end it. We learned so much today. Nando Di Fino from The Athletic, thank you so much for joining us on Deep Coverage.